Right now, something expensive is quietly spreading through the global economy. And most people are only seeing the first sign of it, gas prices. But the number you see at the pump, that's just the beginning. Because when energy prices surge, the cost doesn't stay at the gas station. It moves through trucks, through farms, through airlines, through loans, through every product that needs to be made, shipped, or financed. And economists say when an energy shock spreads through the system, it doesn't hit all at once. It comes in waves. 5 of them. The first wave is already here. The next 4 are still moving toward your wallet. And the reason most people won't see them coming has nothing to do with intelligence. It has to do with how the human brain reacts to financial threats. Today, we're going to walk through the 5 waves of rising costs, the psychology that causes people to underestimate them, and the simple financial moves that protect you when shocks like this hit the economy. Because history shows something interesting. During every major economic disruption, some people panic, and others quietly position themselves to come out ahead. Wave 1. Fuel. Let's start with the most obvious one, fuel. When oil prices rise, gasoline follows almost immediately. Drivers notice it instantly. You pull into a gas station, and the number on the sign is suddenly higher than it was last week. For many households, this means spending more every time they fill their tank. But here's the thing. For most families, gas alone isn't financially devastating. It's annoying. Maybe you spend a little more per week. Maybe you drive a little less. Your brain classifies it as manageable. And this is exactly where the first psychological trap appears. Because humans naturally underestimate problems that arrive gradually. Psychologists call this mental accounting. Your brain organizes money into invisible categories: gas, food, entertainment, savings. When one category suddenly becomes more expensive, your brain doesn't calmly rebalance everything. Instead, it starts cutting the things that feel optional. Restaurants disappear, vacations get postponed, subscriptions get canceled. But the bigger danger is this. People assume the damage stops with fuel. It doesn't. Fuel is just the first domino. Wave 2. Groceries. The second wave shows up somewhere everyone visits every week. The grocery store. Most of the food you buy travels hundreds or even thousands of miles before it reaches your plate. Produce, meat, dairy, seafood. Almost all of it moves by truck. And trucks run on diesel. When diesel becomes more expensive, transportation costs increase. And when transportation costs rise, food prices eventually follow. But this doesn't happen instantly. Retailers usually absorb some of the increase at first. They try to avoid shocking customers with sudden price jumps. But there's a limit to how long businesses can absorb higher costs. Eventually, those costs reach the shelf. And the items that tend to rise first are the ones that can't sit in storage for long. Fresh produce, milk, eggs, meat, the things people buy every single week, which means even small increases quickly add up. Wave 3. Farming costs. Wave 3 is much slower, but it can be far more powerful. Agriculture. Modern farming depends heavily on energy. Fuel runs tractors. Fuel runs irrigation systems. Fuel runs transportation. And even fertilizer production requires enormous amounts of energy. When energy prices surge, fertilizer becomes more expensive to produce. And when fertilizer becomes more expensive, farmers face higher costs months before their crops are even harvested. That means the food being planted today could cost more by the time it reaches stores later in the year. And by the time consumers notice the change, the decisions that caused it were made months earlier. This delay makes the third wave especially dangerous, because by the time it becomes visible, there's nothing anyone can do to reverse it quickly. Wave 4. Travel. The fourth wave often appears in a place many people don't expect: air travel. Airplanes run on jet fuel, and jet fuel is derived directly from crude oil. When oil prices surge, airlines face higher operating costs almost immediately. But unlike gas stations, airlines don't adjust prices every day. They build future fuel costs into ticket prices months in advance. So when energy prices spike, airfare often increases weeks or months later, which means the trip you planned for the summer could suddenly become far more expensive than expected, even if oil prices stabilize later. Wave 5. Interest rates. The fifth is the most complicated and potentially the most powerful: interest rates. When energy costs surge across the economy, they can push inflation higher. And when inflation rises, central banks face a difficult decision: raise interest rates to slow inflation or keep rates lower to support economic growth. Both options carry risks. Higher rates make mortgages, car loans, and credit cards more expensive. Lower rates risk allowing inflation to accelerate further. This balancing act becomes even harder when global uncertainty increases. And when uncertainty rises, consumers often change their behavior. They delay major purchases: homes, cars, renovations, large investments, not because they can't afford them today, but because they're unsure about tomorrow. When millions of households make that same decision at the same time, economic momentum slows. Why most people underestimate this? At this point, you might be wondering something. If these patterns are so predictable, why do most people miss them? The answer lies in something psychologists call anchoring bias. When humans face complex problems, the brain grabs the most visible piece of information and treats it as the entire problem. Right now, that anchor is gas prices. If gas feels manageable, people assume the overall situation is manageable. But economic systems are interconnected. Energy touches almost everything: manufacturing, transportation, agriculture, travel, finance, which means energy shocks rarely stay isolated, they spread. History offers some fascinating lessons about moments like this. When geopolitical conflicts or supply disruptions push energy prices higher, financial markets often react quickly. Stocks can fall. Investors become nervous. Volatility rises. But historically, something interesting tends to happen afterward. Markets often recover faster than people expect, because economies adapt, supply chains adjust, energy production increases, and businesses innovate to reduce costs. The people who panic during these periods often lock in losses, while those who stay patient frequently benefit from the eventual recovery. There is, however, one scenario economists worry about more than any other: stagflation. This happens when inflation rises while economic growth slows at the same time. It's a difficult environment for policymakers because the tools used to fix inflation can sometimes slow the economy further, and the tools used to stimulate growth can sometimes increase inflation. Energy shocks have historically played a role in several stagflationary periods, which is why economists watch them closely. The most important battle during economic disruptions isn't happening in oil markets or stock exchanges. It's happening inside people's minds. Human beings evolved to respond quickly to threats. When uncertainty rises, the brain's alarm system activates, and that system pushes us toward immediate action: sell, cancel, retreat, protect. This response helped humans survive dangerous environments thousands of years ago, but financial systems operate on much longer timelines. Retirement accounts last decades, investment strategies play out over years, and reacting emotionally to short-term shocks can sometimes create long-term financial damage. What you can actually control. The good news is that during periods of uncertainty, a few simple actions can dramatically improve financial stability. First, avoid panic decisions. Major financial choices made during moments of fear often turn out to be the most expensive ones. Second, strengthen your emergency savings. Having several months of expenses available creates psychological stability during uncertain times. That stability allows you to make rational decisions instead of reactive ones. Third, review your budget early. If rising costs are coming, adjusting your budget before the pressure arrives gives you more flexibility. And fourth, if you invest regularly, consistency often matters more than perfect timing. Markets move in cycles, and volatility can sometimes create opportunities that only become obvious in hindsight. The pattern that repeats. Every major economic disruption in modern history follows a similar pattern. At first, only a few signals appear. Then, more effects begin spreading through the system. Then, headlines become louder. But by the time the full impact is obvious, the smartest adjustments were already made earlier. The households that navigate these periods best aren't necessarily the richest. They're usually the ones who recognized the signals early and adjusted gradually. Small decisions, small improvements, small protections, made before the pressure arrived. Economic shocks rarely announce themselves clearly. They appear as scattered signals: higher fuel prices, more expensive groceries, rising airfare, changing interest rates. Each one seems manageable on its own, but together, they form a much bigger picture. The goal isn't to panic. The goal is awareness, because the people who pay attention early have something incredibly valuable: time. And time is the one advantage that allows smart financial decisions to compound quietly in the background, long after the headlines move on.